The rain had begun just after dusk, a slow, steady drizzle that blurred the streetlights of Brighton into halos of amber. Inside the terraced house on Elmwood Road, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional drip of water from the porch awning onto the stone step. The girl sat on the edge of the sofa, knees pressed together, hands folded in her lap, or rather, twisted in the frayed hem of her navy hoodie, the one with the faded band logo she'd bought at a flea market last summer. Her black jeans were torn at the knee, the fabric frayed from walking too fast, too carelessly, like she always did when she wanted to escape something or someone. The living room was warm, but not comforting. The single-floor lamp cast a golden pool over the rug, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like forgotten memories. On the coffee table, a mug of tea sat untouched, the steam long gone. Beside it, resting on the polished mahogany surface like an accusation, lay the paddle. It was old, dark walnut, smooth from years of use, carved with faint initials near the handle. Edith M., her grandmother's. It had been kept in the hall cabinet for nearly a decade. Not used, not needed, until tonight. The front door stood slightly ajar. A cold draft slipped in, brushing the girl's bare ankles. She didn't move, didn't shiver, didn't look toward the door. She stared at the paddle, as if, by willing it to disappear, she could undo what had happened. Outside, the last sound of the boy's bicycle bell had faded into the wet night. He'd left quickly, too quickly, as if he'd realized, too late, that he'd wandered into a house that wasn't his and never should have been. Inside, the house felt like a museum of all the things she'd broken. She told her aunt, going out with friends. Back by 8. It wasn't a lie. Not entirely. She had gone out. But the friends? They dissolved into the crowd at the cafe on the seafront. She'd sat alone, scrolling through her phone, listening to the rain tap against the windows. Then he came, tall, tousled hair, a leather jacket smelling of cigarettes and cologne, eyes that held too much confidence for someone who'd just asked to borrow a charger. Just for 5 minutes, he'd said. I'll be back before you finish your latte. She hadn't said no. By the time she walked home, 20 minutes late, cheeks flushed from laughter she didn't remember starting, she'd already decided. He's harmless. Just a boy. No big deal. Her aunt was supposed to be at her sister's funeral in Leeds. A 3-hour drive. A day of grief. She'd said as much on the phone that morning. So when the girl unlocked the front door, she didn't think twice about letting him in. She offered him tea. He declined. She offered the sofa. He accepted. He picked up a book from the shelf, the collected poems of Eleanor Maynard, her mother's. The one she'd read aloud every Sunday night before bed, when the girl was small, before the accident, before the silence grew louder than any voice. The boy flipped through the pages, humming. She didn't stop him. She didn't turn on the hall light. She didn't lock the door. And then the key in the lock. Not the slow, familiar turn of her aunt's key. Not the sigh of relief that usually followed her return. This was sharp, purposeful, like a door being closed on something final. The girl froze. The boy looked up, startled. Aunt Margaret stood in the doorway, still in her black coat, her gloves in hand, her eyes, usually warm as tea, always steady, now cold as the rain outside.
She didn't speak.
She didn't scream. She closed the door. Slowly. Then she looked at the boy. You may leave. He didn't argue. Didn't apologize. Didn't even look at her. He grabbed his jacket and was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Aunt Margaret peeled off her coat, hung it on the hook, removed her gloves, placed them neatly beside her purse. Then she turned to the girl. Go to the living room. The girl didn't move.
Now. She did.
And that was when she saw it. The paddle. Still on the console table. Still waiting. She knew what it meant. She'd seen it once before, when she was 10. When she'd sneaked out to meet a boy at the park after curfew. Her grandmother had used it then, and her aunt had held her while she cried. That had been the last time. Until tonight. The hallway was narrow. The air smelled of wet wool and lavender soap, her aunt scent. The paddle sat on the console table, catching the dim light from the sconce above. "Take off your hoodie." The girl didn't answer.
Now.
She unzipped it slowly. The fabric clung to her arms, sticky with the damp from the night. She pulled it over her head, letting it fall to the floor. Bend over the sofa. Hands on the cushions. She walked to the sofa. Her legs felt like stone. She bent, pressing her palms flat against the velvet fabric, her forehead nearly touching the armrest. She could feel the coolness of the wood beneath her thighs through the thin cotton of her jeans. The first strike came without warning. Thwack. The sound was sharp.
Clean.
It echoed off the walls.
She gasped.
The second came faster. Thwack. Her breath hitched. The third, harder. Thwack. Tears spilled before she could stop them. She didn't cry out. Not then. The fourth strike landed lower, just above the seam of her jeans. "That's for letting a stranger into this house while your mother is still grieving." The words didn't land like anger. They landed like loss. The fifth, even slower, more deliberate. "Thwack. That's for forgetting what your grandmother taught you. A home is not a stage for your recklessness." The paddle didn't sting like fire. It ached like truth. She felt the heat rise, not just on her skin, but inside her chest. A slow, burning shame. She hadn't just broken a rule. She'd broken a legacy. Her grandmother had raised her aunt after the war, had taught her. A door left open is a door that invites danger. A heart left unguarded is a heart that gets stolen. Her aunt had never forgotten. And now, she was making sure the girl wouldn't either. The paddle was set down gently on the floor. The silence returned. And this time, it was unbearable. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't think. I thought it was harmless." Aunt Margaret knelt beside her. Not close. Not touching. Just there. Harmless. Her voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than the paddle ever had. "You didn't think about what he might have taken, not just things. Your safety. Your dignity. Your family's trust." The girl shook her head, tears falling onto the sofa cushion. I thought you'd never come back." Aunt Margaret didn't move. "And if I hadn't?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The girl didn't answer. She didn't have to, because now she knew. If her aunt hadn't returned, if she'd been gone for hours, if the boy had stayed longer, if he'd taken something else, if he'd taken her, she'd have never known what she'd lost, because she'd never learned to guard it. She'd thought she was grown. She hadn't realized that growing up didn't mean you stopped needing to be kept safe. It meant you had to learn how to keep yourself. A single sob escaped her, raw, broken. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "No," her aunt said softly. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You meant to hurt yourself." The girl flinched. Her aunt stood and walked away. The girl stayed bent over the sofa for a long time. Her thighs burned. Her cheeks were wet. Her hoodie lay on the floor like a discarded skin. She didn't move until she heard the kettle whistle, a small, familiar sound from the kitchen. When she finally stood, her legs trembled. She pulled her hoodie back on, but didn't zip it. She didn't bother to smooth her hair. She just walked to the kitchen. Her aunt stood by the counter, pouring 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Steam curled upward like a prayer. She placed one mug on the table beside the framed photograph of her grandmother. The same woman who had once held her, after the paddle, and whispered, "You'll learn. And then you'll teach." The girl sat. Her aunt sat beside her. Neither spoke. The tea steamed between them. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street lamp flickered once, then glowed steady. The girl reached out, slowly, trembling, and placed her hand, just once, on her aunt's wrist. Not to apologize. Not to beg. Just to say, Asterisk I see you. I hear you. I'm still here. Asterisk her aunt didn't pull away. She didn't smile. But her fingers, resting on the mug, curled slightly, just enough to press against the girl's knuckles. For a moment, the house held its breath. Then, softly, the grandfather clock chimed 9 times. The girl picked up her tea. She didn't drink it. She just held it.
Warm. Alive.
And for the first time in months, since her mother's funeral, since the silence had swallowed everything, she didn't feel alone. The paddle was still on the floor.
But the door was closed.
And the tea, still warm, was enough.